The rain was coming down so hard that most drivers could barely see the road ahead, but Daniel Carter noticed something through the curtain of water that everyone else ignored: a car sitting helplessly on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking like a desperate heartbeat. Two young women stood beside it, completely soaked, staring at the open hood as traffic rushed past them. Daniel had every reason to keep driving. He was already late, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, and his old truck was barely holding together itself. But then he saw one of the women cover her face with her trembling hands, and something inside him refused to let him pass. He pulled his truck onto the shoulder, stepped into the freezing rain, and walked toward them without knowing that this simple act of kindness would change 3 lives forever. Daniel Carter was 38 years old and had learned the hard way that life did not always reward good people quickly. He was a single father raising his young daughter, Lily, in a small apartment on the edge of town. Every morning before work, he packed her lunch, checked her homework, and made sure she had everything she needed. Then he spent the day repairing machines at a small auto repair shop, coming home with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his eyes. Money was always tight. There were overdue bills on the kitchen counter, a refrigerator that made strange noises, and an old truck that Daniel kept alive with repairs he could barely afford. But whenever Lily asked if they were going to be okay, Daniel always smiled and told her they would. He had lost his wife several years earlier, and since then, he had quietly carried the responsibility of being both parents. He never complained in front of Lily. He simply kept moving forward. That evening, the storm had arrived without warning. Daniel had been driving home with a grocery bag on the passenger seat when he spotted the stranded car. It was an expensive black sedan, the kind of vehicle that usually belonged to people who never had to worry about repair bills. 2 women stood beside it. One looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a soaked brown coat, while the other wore a white business jacket that was quickly becoming drenched. They looked frightened and frustrated, completely out of place beside the broken-down vehicle. Daniel parked his truck and walked toward them. He didn't ask whether they could pay him. He didn't ask who they were. He simply lifted the hood and began inspecting the engine. If you believe kindness still matters, if you believe people deserve second chances, and if you believe one small act can change someone's life, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more YK stories that remind us there is still goodness in the world. Daniel quickly discovered that the problem wasn't as serious as it looked. A loose connection had caused the engine to shut down, and the heavy rain had made everything worse. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, reached into the engine compartment, and began working with his bare hands. Water ran down his face and soaked through his jacket, but he didn't stop. The 2 women watched silently as the man in worn work clothes fought against the storm to get their car running. Several vehicles passed without slowing down. One driver even honked impatiently because Daniel was standing near the road. But Daniel kept working. After nearly 20 minutes, he tightened the connection, checked the battery, and asked the driver to try starting the engine. The sedan roared back to life. For a moment, neither woman moved. They simply stared at Daniel as though they couldn't believe it. The woman in the brown coat reached for her purse, clearly preparing to offer him money, but Daniel shook his head. He told them to keep it and get somewhere safe before the storm became worse. Then he turned toward his truck. But before he could leave, the woman in the white jacket stopped him. She looked at him carefully, noticing the worn boots, the faded jacket, and the exhaustion behind his eyes. She asked why he had stopped when everyone else had driven past. Daniel simply shrugged and said that he hoped someone would do the same for his daughter if she were ever stranded on a dark road. Those words hit both women harder than any dramatic speech could have. They thanked him again, but Daniel climbed into his truck and drove away, never expecting to see them again. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the repair shop and found his manager waiting near the entrance. Business had been slow for months, and the shop was struggling. Daniel was told that his hours were being reduced immediately. He nodded, pretending the news didn't hurt. He had a daughter to feed, rent to pay, and bills already waiting at home. He walked into the garage, put on his work gloves, and continued repairing cars as if nothing had happened. Around noon, a black sedan pulled into the shop. Daniel froze. The same two women from the storm stepped out. But this time, they weren't wearing soaked clothes. They looked polished and professional. The woman in the brown coat walked toward Daniel with a warm smile. She introduced herself as Emily Hart, and her companion was her business partner, Claire. Daniel suddenly realized they were not ordinary travelers. Emily was the CEO of a successful regional company, and Claire was the company's chief financial officer. Emily told Daniel that they had spent the entire morning trying to find him. They had called several repair shops until they finally recognized the description of his truck. Daniel looked confused and uncomfortable. He thought perhaps they had come to repay him. Instead, Emily handed him an envelope. Inside was not cash. It was a business card and an invitation to interview for a senior maintenance position at her company. Daniel stared at it. He explained that he wasn't looking for charity. Emily smiled and told him she wasn't offering charity. She was offering an opportunity because she had watched him help two strangers when he had every reason to keep driving. Daniel eventually accepted the interview. A week later, he got the job. The salary was enough to catch up on his bills, but that wasn't the greatest change. For the first time in years, Daniel began to believe that perhaps his life could become something more than survival. He moved into a better apartment with Lily, paid off the debts that had kept him awake at night, and started saving for his daughter's future. But Emily and Claire didn't disappear after giving him the opportunity. They became friends. They often visited Daniel's repair department, sometimes pretending they needed something fixed just to spend time with him. Lily grew comfortable around them, and Daniel slowly discovered that Emily wasn't simply a wealthy CEO. She was a woman who had spent years building walls around her own heart because she had been hurt by people who only valued her money. Daniel never treated her differently because of her wealth. He treated her like a person. Months later, on a quiet evening after work, Daniel stood outside the company building when Emily and Claire approached him. Emily smiled and reminded him of that rainy night when they first met. Then she looked at him with genuine affection and told him that they wanted to see him again, not because he had fixed their car, but because the man who had stopped in the rain had reminded them what real kindness looked like. Daniel smiled. He looked up at the evening sky and thought about how close he had come to driving past them that night. Sometimes, the moments that change our lives don't arrive with warning. They appear as inconvenient opportunities, unexpected strangers, or simple chances to help someone who may never be able to repay us. Daniel had stopped because he believed someone should. He never knew that the kindness he gave away in the rain would eventually find its way back to him. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all: kindness doesn't always return in the same form, from the same person, or at the same time. But when it comes from the heart, it leaves a mark somewhere. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you stories that inspire hope. And before you go, comment, "Kindness always returns," if you believe one small act of kindness can change an entire life. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stop in the rain.